by Joseph Heller. That's what
Yeah.
you can understand, you know. Essentially, my father knew something had happened to him, and he could only understand a fraction of that, right? And was willing or able to tell part of that, and there's a continual loss of actuality as the story gets told.
Over to it.
Moss, published in 1991 by Art Spiegelman, is a graphic memoir that tells the true story of his father, Vladik, a Polish Jewish Holocaust survivor, through the conversations between characters Art and Vladik. The book explores survival during World War II and the lasting effects of trauma and the complicated relationship between a father and son. So my question is, how does Art Spiegelman construct the transmission of trauma from Vladik to Art? And what extent does Moss suggest that trauma can persist through memory, behavior, relationships, and identity, even when the second generation did not experience the original event? Spiegelman suggests that the Holocaust trauma can persist through generations, but he complicates the idea of direct inheritance through the stylistic features of anthropomorphic allegory, non-chronological sequential art, the dual narrative of Art and Vladik's story, symbolism, and the depiction of characters. Spiegelman additionally employs the genre features of graphic novel medium and the black and white print. Through the construction of Moss, Spiegelman ultimately presents trauma as something transformed, as it moves from experience to memory, from memory to behavior and relationships, and finally into art's identity and representation. There are four main mechanisms that contribute to the transmission of Holocaust trauma: memory, behavior, relationships, and identity. Spiegelman first constructs intergenerational trauma through memory, showing Art's knowledge of the Holocaust is inherited, not experienced. However, memory is fragmented. Art inherits both his parents' memories, specifically the silences surrounding them. So, from the opening of Moss, we see that Spiegelman establishes that the Holocaust trauma reaches Art through memory. We see Vladik's experiences is filtered through his storytelling as Art questions about the experiences and memories that he had in the Holocaust. And finally, Spiegelman, he reconstructs this through the whole construction of Moss. This structure is really significant because Art, he never experiences Auschwitz. This relationship with the Holocaust is more similar to what Marian Hirsch calls post-memory. Vladik, Art's father, he experiences one of the worst genocides in history. He tries to recount his memories through his perspective as a Jew, in the best way he could. He describes his trauma, his guilt, his pain, experiencing hardships including typhus, starvation, abuse, and heavy labor. Spiegelman further employs the genre of the graphic novel to juxtapose the harsh memories of the Holocaust with the frivolity of the genre, further connecting to the transmission of trauma as Art copes with the trauma learned from Vladik through humor tools. A significant example occurs at the end of Moss 2, when Vladik accidentally calls Art Richu, his son who was killed during the Holocaust. This moment demonstrates how Vladik's traumatic past continues to influence his relationship with his living son. Spiegelman uses dialogue and juxtaposition to connect Richu's past with Art's present. The gravestone in the middle of the page visually connects Vladik and Anya's past with Art's present, suggesting that the past cannot be separated from the present. This is significant to intergenerational trauma because Art never experienced the Holocaust himself, yet he experiences its consequences through Vladik's memories. By being called Richu, Art is momentarily associated with the brother he never knew, showing how the Holocaust has become a part of his identity. So then that's why Spiegelman suggests that memory isn't just transferred through generations. It has such a complex fix to it. It is transferred through behavior, memory, identity, and relationships. Trauma in Moss does not remain within memory. Spiegelman demonstrates that the past becomes embedded in Vladik's behavior. He shows that trauma can be transmitted through behavior rather than explicit memory, as Vladik's extreme frugality appears irrational within the safety of his post-war life, but then we can understand him when we learn that it is a survival mentality developed under the conditions of scarcity. The important part for Art is that he doesn't experience the Holocaust deprivation firsthand. Instead, he experiences the behavior collateral damage through his father. Spiegelman therefore relocates the Holocaust trauma from the concentration camp into the ordinary domestic environment. He suggests that the survival strategies can outlive the circumstances that produce them. For example, we see that Vladik repeatedly presents himself as resourceful and adaptable, describing how he used his skills such as English and tinsmithing and even shoemaking to create opportunities for himself. These characteristics were really valuable survival mechanisms within the unstable conditions of the Holocaust. So we can see through panel sequencing and visual characterization, Spiegelman depicts Vladik repeatedly adapting to different circumstances, visually reinforcing his resourcefulness and survival mentality. We see as the movement between the panels, allows his ability to find solutions and exploit the opportunities to become a recurring characteristic rather than finding an isolated action. However, Spiegelman shows that survival does not simply end when liberation occurs. Vladik's resourcefulness becomes an enduring part of his personality, meaning that Art encounters the Holocaust indirectly through the father it helped shape. Vladik has lived through a world where possessions can be lost, resources were scarce, material goods had practical value, and survival depended on making use of what was available. Spiegelman therefore constructs trauma as something relational. Vladik survives the Holocaust, but Art inherits the psychological habits that survival produced. These behaviors become particularly significant because they influence the relationship between Vladik and Art. Spiegelman demonstrates that trauma is transmitted most visibly through family relationships. Vladik's past shapes the way he behaves towards Art, while Art's frustration makes it difficult for him to separate his father from the history that shaped him. Vladik's Holocaust experiences shapes the father he becomes, and Art consequently encounters the Holocaust through his relationship with him. Their arguments over money, possessions, and behavior therefore have a deeper significance. Beneath the ordinary conflict between father and son is the psychological legacy of a history that Art never experienced himself. It is through dialogue, contrast, and characterization Spiegelman presents a father-to-son relationship affected by different generational experiences. Spiegelman suggests that intergenerational trauma is relational. The second generation can inherit the consequences of trauma through the way survivors behave, communicate, form relationships, and live. Vladik interprets the world through the knowledge of someone who has experienced extreme scarcity and persecution. Art, however, has grown up in a completely different environment. This creates conflict because Art can see Vladik's behavior as controlling and frustrating, while the reader can understand how Vladik's past has contributed to these behaviors. This relationship becomes even more complicated when Vladik's memory of his lost son, Richu, begins to overlap with his relationship with Art. This transmission becomes particularly self-conscious in Moss 2, when Spiegelman depicts himself sitting at his drawing desk, surrounded by bodies and wearing the mouse mask. The enormous scale of the bodies compared to Art's small figure creates a visual metaphor for the overwhelming historical trauma he's attempting to represent. Importantly, Art is not simply depicting Auschwitz, he's depicting himself attempting to reconstruct a memory that does not belong to him. In this sense, Spiegelman makes the process of transmission itself visible as Vladik experiencing the Holocaust and then inheriting its memory and consequences, then Art transforms that inherited memory into a representation for the reader. Art's identity is also shaped by the absence of Richu. Spiegelman constructs Richu as an absent presence in Art's life. Although Art never met his brother and he was not alive during the Holocaust, Richu's death still shapes Art's childhood identity. The photograph transforms a person Art never knew into an idealized figure against whom he feels unable to compete. Art describes him as a ghost brother, saying that the photo had never threw any tantrums or got into any trouble, and that the photo was kind of like a reproach. He also describes the experience as a spooky having sibling rivalry. This demonstration is an identity-based transmission. Vladik and Anya's Holocaust experience resulted in Richu's death, but the consequences extend into Art's generation. Art inherits the emotional consequences of a brother he never knew, including guilt and nightmares. Importantly, Art does not experience the Holocaust directly. He experiences its consequences through his family's memory and loss. This demonstrates that memory and trauma can persist through identity, even when the second generation did not experience the original event. Art inherits not a literal memory of Auschwitz, but he inherits the consequences of absence, guilt, family expectations, and imagined memories. As Marion Hirsch explains it in her research about the transmission of post-memory trauma, she says that the family inherits a collective of experiences over time. Art did not experience the Holocaust, but he experiences the consequences through his parents, particularly through the memory of virtue. Therefore, Spiegelman complicates intergenerational trauma. He inherits the Holocaust's physiological aftermath, and he also develops his own experience of loss. Art Spiegelman makes the transmission of trauma even more explicit in the comic within a comic, Prisoner on Hell Planet. Unlike the simplified animal imagery used throughout much of Moss, this section uses a radically different expressionistic visual style, with heavy black and white contrast, distorted human figures, and claustrophobic compositions. This sudden change in style distinguishes Art's personal trauma from Vladek's Holocaust testimony. In this, the photography of Art and Anya creates a contrast between the photographic memory and artistic reconstruction of Art. Art is attempting to process and represent a relationship that has been permanently altered by the loss. This can again be connected to Marian Hirsch's concept of post-memory, because Art develops a powerful relationship with the traumatic experiences that precede in his own life. However, Hell Planet can also demonstrate that Art's trauma is not simply inherited. His mother's death is personally experienced by him. Therefore, Spiegelman complicates intergenerational trauma. He inherits the Holocaust's physiological aftermath, and he also develops his own experience of loss. This idea can also relate to my own life. Growing up as a first-generation immigrant from the Philippines, my parents had grown up in poverty and struggled to keep their family alive. My mom's behavior stays similar to Vladek's. She always tries to get the best clothes for me and best things, and refuses to let me wear anything remotely torn, while she wears the same clothes she's worn since 10 years ago. This connection helps me understand how experiences from one generation can influence the behavior of the next, even when the next generation didn't experience the original circumstances themselves. Marian Hirsch coined the term post-memory in the 1990s. It combines the Latin-derived prefix post, meaning after, with the English noun memory. Hirsch creates the word to describe how children of the Holocaust survivors inherit deep, traumatic memories of events that happened before they were born. Her work was inspired by Moss. Ultimately, Moss suggests to a significant extent that the Holocaust trauma can persist across generations even when the second generation didn't experience the original event. However, Spiegelman complicates the idea of trauma being directly inherited. Art does not experience Auschwitz as Vladek does. Instead, he inherits the consequences through fragmented memories, survival behaviors, strained family relationships, and an identity shaped by loss and absence. The progression from memory to behavior to relationships and to identity demonstrates that trauma changes as it moves between generations. Vladek's experiences becomes Art's inherited history, and then Art transforms that history into artistic representation. Therefore, the Holocaust persistence in Moss does not depend on Art having it experienced firsthand. It persists because its consequences continue to shape the way Art remembers, relates to his family, understands himself, and tells his story.